We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round and leave fire. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning we shall learn to lead in shall be known. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round and leave fire.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Martin Wagner. I'm a member of the coordinating committee of Third Act Faith, and I'm really happy that you're all here for this interesting conversation that we will have this afternoon, this evening. Before I dive in, I just want to share that I am sitting not in my home in Berkeley, but in the redwoods of Northern California, and that I'm outside and I can smell that wonderful duff smell of the soil and the fallen needles. And as I was driving up here just less than an hour ago, I saw a couple of whales breaching in the ocean as I was driving up. So I hope that you all are feeling some kind of similar connection to the natural world where you are. I'm really excited that we have two people here to share with us a perspective I think we haven't heard in this group before. Bethsaida Ruiz and Joshua Gorman are leaders of the Thrive Network, which is an Oakland-based community and movement that gathers people at the intersection of meaning, belonging, music, the arts, and social change. They are also co-facilitators of a year-long course called Rooting in the Sacred that is, as it is described, designed to guide seekers, dreamers, and change makers on a deeply personal and collective journey into the emerging future of spirituality. Rooting in the Sacred invites participants to engage in spirituality as a living, breathing force for personal and societal transformation. And it's precisely this that I'm excited to have us hear from Bethsaida and Joshua about in just a few minutes. When we do, I want to remind you that we're going to have time for questions and answers. And as you are listening, if questions come to you, please put them into the chat, and we'll have a couple of people who will keep track of those and can help make sure that they get asked. And then if we have more time afterwards, we can have some live Q&A. But we are going to start with a centering exercise that Bethsaida has offered to lead. So thank you, Bethsaida.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I spent this afternoon with my muse on a call where they sang that song. And I'm always very touched by that sentence to lead in love. It actually, every time I hear it, I feel a lot of emotion, especially for these times. So I'm going to actually start out with an invocation. And so if folks want to, if they get comfortable in your seat, and yeah, just let yourself arrive into the space. Um, and just you're not arriving just here in this room, but you're also arriving in your body. So plant your feet on the floor, and then lift your spine, and allow your shoulders to go soft and your hands to gently, just sit on your lap. And if it feels right for you, you may close your eyes or soften your gaze, um, and notice the weight of your body, the rise and fall of your breath. And just begin to inhale slowly, pausing for a minute, and then just hold it for a heartbeat, and then exhale, letting it go. And again, just breathe in and release, feeling life moving through you. And one more time, inhale slowly, exhale, letting go. And we call in presence at the opening, courage to meet what is unfamiliar, and tenderness to honor what is known. And this afternoon we gather at a threshold where hearts seek meaning and souls seek connection, where the sacred whispers outside the walls of tradition. Some call this spiritual but not religious, but no word can hold the longing to belong, to be seen, to move in right relationship with self, with others, with life itself. This afternoon is not for defining, it is for encountering. And I invite you to ask, how do we meet across difference with love? How do we honor our paths while making space for new ways of being? May we listen not to answer, but to understand. May we loosen the grip of certainty and let curiosity rise like a gentle tide. And may we remember relationship itself is sacred. And as I and Joshua speak, may you hear and feel your heart lift, your body settle, your awareness open, grounded in compassion, reaching towards transformation. Let the space where bridges form, where wisdom flows, where something vital and new takes root among us. And so together we begin. When you're ready, you can open your eyes, going back to the rhythm of your breath. Thank you.
Thank you, Bethsaida, so much. And that invocation grounded us exactly where we want to be, I think, for this conversation. And I love that you named that names like or titles like spiritual but not religious are not really the point. And yet I'm going to ask you each to start with a question that might tempt you to use words and names. So feel free to. And it's a question that I know one takes a lifetime to answer, but could each of you start by sort of giving us a sense of your spiritual background and a little bit about how you locate yourself spiritually right now? And I don't know, Joshua, if you want to start, given that Bethsaida just spoke.
I'm open to that. Thank you, Martin. Bethsaida, what do you think? Should I go first? Okay. All right. Well, welcome, friends, and thank you for hosting Bethsaida and myself. We're honored to be here. I shared in the chat, I'm joining today from Grass Valley, Nisan on land, so about 2.5 hours from the East Bay, where I moved a few years ago. Yeah, Bethsaida and I love sharing our spiritual backgrounds. And in fact, part of our Rooting in the Sacred program is we invite all participants to actually write their spiritual biographies. And it's just a really powerful practice. So I will share, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. suburbs in a pretty mainstream American family, and my mother was a very devout Christian. I grew up in a Lutheran churches for the most part. My mom is still a very devout, active Christian, and I often attribute most of my goodness, like my good heart and good spirit, to her, to her love, to her faith. So I just want to honor my mother, Lydia. Um, when I was a teenager, though, I grew up in a very multicultural area. My best friend was Pakistani American, and he was part of a very devout Muslim family. And I had the gift of starting to question my faith, in my kind of mid-teens. And I found another soul who was raised with a different religious narrative, and we realized quickly, like, wow, we have like the same souls asking the same questions, and we each have these different religious worldviews that actually say, opposite things, like you got to believe this to go to heaven or that to go to heaven. And so I lost my religious kind of grounding and faith and worldview, in those years, right? Definitely by like 15-ish. And I entered into the beginning of, an existential kind of life crisis and exploration time. And so I would say it was the beginning of becoming what some folks call a seeker, but they were very dark years. I didn't have support systems to help hold the process I was going through. And so um, I will fast forward. I'm probably about halfway through here. I had many years of doing exactly that, seeking. When I went to college, I studied world religions like many people do. Houston Smith's work was important to me. I discovered teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh that just, spoke spiritual truths and practices in such a universal way. And so that was helpful. Um, and I ended up in the islands of Hawaii. I lived on the big island of Hawaii where the volcano is in my early 20s. And I had some really profound back to nature experiences. And I had some of my first mystical experiences where I just, had deep, deep connection with what we call, the divine, or higher power or life itself. And so I would say I became very spiritual, deeply spiritual, but still not traditionally religious, right, in my early 20s. And so I'll share a couple more chapters. I went back to Washington, D.C. After that chapter, I became an activist and a youth organizer, but I still was religiously homeless. You know, I didn't feel like I fit in. I would go with my mom every now and then just to sing in church. I started to I started to check out interfaith spaces. And so I spent many years kind of in interfaith communities, attending interfaith conferences and events. And I still didn't feel like I belonged. I had the experience of like in the interfaith context, like I didn't have an actual faith tradition, right? And so they would say, "Oh, well, you're a seeker," right? But it kind of felt like not equal, right, to everybody else in the room who had, you know, a particular tradition. So even in the interfaith space, um, I did not feel a sense of belonging. So I think the last chapter I'll share, you know, over the last 20 years, I've been someone who's really studied like the future of religion and spirituality. And at some point in time, I discovered what people call the nones, the Nones, which some of you may be familiar with. And that's, that's the folks who maybe just don't fit in anywhere, right? It's this category when they do the surveys around religious identity, right? It's the none of the above category or, nothing in particular. Those are some of the terms they use. And so, at first that felt a little dismissive in its own way and not very empowering. But I began to discover like, wow, there's a large segment, of the modern population, right, that has this kind of non-identity, and I started to connect in with like the possibilities within it. And so, I'm a student of that. So, Martin, um, I spiritual but not religious works for me. I wrote an article that I published about a year ago that I intentionally titled "Coming Out as Spiritual and a New Kind of Religious." Right. So I often would say, I'm spiritual but not traditionally religious, but I identify as someone who's deeply religious, right? In the sense of my life is devoted to meaning, to purpose, to service, right? Um, so that's some of the complexity of my spiritual narrative. And you'll hear more about our work with Thrive and Rooting in the Sacred, which also tells a little bit of, my quest for belonging as well.
Thank you, Joshua. I want to, before Bethsaida, you answer the question, I just want to highlight one thing that you said and that rings true for me as my path has a lot of parallels to yours. You named that being spiritual but not religious has a sort of a not belonging feeling, but what really rang true to me is the not equal piece, that we live in this world where religious people at least have institutions and have community that is clear and live in a way that is maybe understood by the culture, and the SBNRs kind of, there's an inequality in the lack of location and understanding. So thanks for naming that.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
Saida, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. Gracias. Thank you, Joshua. My name is Bethsaida Ruiz, Natal. And I am currently in Ohlone land here in Oakland, California, in the East Bay. And I go back and forth between the East Bay and Utuado, Puerto Rico, which is territory of the Taínos and Borinquen. And I was born and raised in New York City, in a very Puerto Rican neighborhood in the projects of New York, um, and very poor in abject poverty and lots of violence and abuse. That was kind of my formative years. Um, and I think that for me, I was born into a richly blended spiritual life shaped by many traditions. My mother, they raised us Catholic. So she was not someone that went to church. but it expected us to like do communion and confirmation and at the Bible study and all of that stuff. And she also at the practice at the her indigenous rituals and at the spirituality. In Puerto Rico, they study Santeria, which is part of the Yoruba religion. And it was was something that was separate um, from the Catholicism, but it was a grounding force in our everyday life. She taught me all the rituals and all the prayers, and I think that that's what carried me. Um,
Mm.
and from a very young age, I was super, super curious about the other faith, the religions. I, at a very young age, did not explore spirituality in the way that I see it today. I was exposed to religion. And so I remember going to a Black Baptist church, mostly because there was food there and they fed you. That kept me going there. I used to sit in a Jewish Orthodox at the temple and would sneak in there and was always wondering why the women were sitting behind the black curtain. And even explored at the Jehovah Witness. I would go to the gatherings. So I was always just open to exploring different things. I was looking for something. I was hungry for something. Um, and at the early age, I was probably at the 13 that I um, at the kind of found myself in at the throes of addiction. Like I just um, just wanted to search for something beyond me, and so I did it through many different drugs. Considered myself like a garbage can. I would just take whatever would take me out of this world and into another world, with this deep desire to find something that would save me from the hell that I was living in. And so, um, I spent many years in that. And in my 30s, as I was struggling with addiction and the desire for deeper clarity, at the Buddhism, I found Buddhism. And I just have taken the Buddhism on as a practice. For me, has shaped who I am today. It changed my life, and it's profoundly shaped how I live and understand the sacred today. I think that the greatest um, um, thing that catapulted me into Buddhism was a pilgrimage that I took to Burma when I went back to school, which marked just a pivotal at the moment of spiritual awakening in me. And I'm not one of those people that had this like great spiritual awakening. It's been very super long and painful and dark, but it's anchored me further into meditation and awareness and believe in the sacredness that's woven in all of life and in every moment of my existence. And I think the way that I see where I am spiritually today is that I see my spiritual path as an evolving mosaic of traditions and practices. I don't consider myself a nun um, but I do consider myself to not have just recently, I consider myself a recovering Catholic, and just recently I've been searching for ways that my upbringing in Catholicism can match the devotion that I feel for humanity today. And I'm going back to my ancestral Santeria roots. And Buddhism still is the pillar of my practice, mindfulness, and deep engagement with the teachings that honor the justice and love, and the community care, which is the basis of Thrive, and we'll talk more about that. Um, and I think it's for me, it's a living presence of honoring the unseen threads that bind us all, that grounds my work, relationships, and community. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bethsaida. I love the journey that both of you have shared, and it feels like that's something that is common to the two of you. And I would say for me too that it's been a seeking path that is drawn syncretically on different traditions that we have passed through. So I appreciate hearing how that's true in both of your lives. Before we dive into Thrive and what you do there, Joshua, I think you have some slides to share about sort of to situate us in who the spiritual but not religious are in our culture. Can you share those?
Yeah, Martin, a quick question. I have some slides that start in the place you were just speaking to, but then they introduce Thrive and rooting in the sacred. So I'm wondering if Bethsaida and I could just share a little bit, both, those slides and the other ones, and then we'll be done with slides. Does that work?
100%. Do whatever works for you.
Great. It's probably so maybe we have I don't know, maybe 12 minutes of sharing, and then there'll still be plenty of time for other
Perfect.
questions and clarifying questions. Okay, wonderful.
Excellent.
So this is going to be a short three-part slide journey. The first part is going to, just highlight some things about the religiously unaffiliated, which is, a large part of the demographic that we work with. And then we'll introduce Thrive, the organization, and then we'll also briefly share about rooting in the sacred. And of course, they all relate. Um, we're a small enough group, so I am going to keep my slides open. All right, can I get a thumbs up that the slides are visible? All right, great. All right, so no matter where we locate ourselves spiritually or religiously, we are living at a time, right, where the landscape is rapidly changing. And of course, for many of us, right, this has been happening all our lives, right? But it's continuing to unfold. So I want to ask a provocative question. What is the fastest growing religious group in the world today? Obviously, you can bend the data in many ways, so someone could argue something else than what I'm going to share. But I think you get where I'm leading us and pointing to. So the fastest growing religious group is actually the nuns, or the religiously unaffiliated. 1/4 of the world's population has no specific religious affiliation. Now, this is not true across the board in every country, right? We know there are countries that are very highly religious and countries that are highly, secular, but there are pockets all throughout the world where this unaffiliation, right, is just steadily increasing. As of 2024, right, approximately 29% of the US population identifies as nuns, a trend that, has just risen since they've been tracking this data. And we see this most especially amongst the young adult population, right? 44% of individuals ages 18 to 29 report no religious affiliation. Language is very problematic. There's a lot of folks, right, who just don't like this term, but it really does help people who study this field and, demographers. It helps us talk about this growing cohort. I want to share, I'm not going to share some other slides if we were taking a deeper dive, but I want to name that, a smaller percentage of nuns are atheists or agnostics, but the largest percentage of nuns are spiritual but not religious folks. And it's complex though, because, it also includes like multiple religious belongers. It's kind of a big term, right? But people who may have, two faith traditions, or even more than that, right? So they just can't identify, right, with one specific faith. There's some playful names at the bottom of the slide for like other names for nuns, right? The Sums, because there is some of this, so some of that, right? The free spirits, the misfits, the post-theists, the multiple religious belongers, the hybrids, the spiritual independence. I want to lift this up because it's not a perfect corollary, but there is a rise in people who identify as politically independent in the United States, right? This is a very fast group, and there's a lot of reasons for that that we can all understand in our modern political climate. But spiritual independence, right, is like a kindred term to political independence. And there's something really interesting there, of like, how can we harness the power, right, of these spiritual independence for a positive politics? Um, so I'm going to share one more slide. So we just like to highlight that, the work we do is what we call a form of spiritual innovation or religious innovation. And I'm sure you all know this personally. It's happening within our traditions, it's happening at the edges of our traditions, and it's happening outside of traditions, right? So within Christianity and Judaism, especially in the United States, but other faiths, there's so many ways that we're updating, right? Our faith communities and faith cultures. And then at the edges of traditions, there's a lot of mixing, right? Between religions and people who have one foot in their faith tradition, right? But also a foot in another spiritual community or practice. And Thrive, which we're going to share about shortly, really started outside of a tradition. For sure, it was informed and by the models of organized religion, right? But it has no connection to a faith community, to a formal spiritual tradition. And so, our work at Thrive is an example of people who are just fully, starting from outside of the box. So you may have questions. I'm happy to come back to this conversation about the nuns and the data and the stats. But we want to just share briefly about our work with Thrive. And I'm going to share our origin story and then pass it to Bethsaida, and we're going to go back and forth a little bit. So Thrive started as Thrive East Bay 10 years ago in Oakland. And there was a small group of us. I was a part of the team that was just, asking that question. Like, there's so many folks who still want belonging, who still want to gather, who still want to sing. Some of us were becoming parents, and we were starting to think, like, oh, and we want our kids, right, around positive values. And so we just decided, because we were organizers and facilitators, like, hey, let's experiment with something. And just start hosting Sunday events that have no religious dogma or belief system. It just, kind of has the universal value of like love and kindness and, and justice. I mean, I would say we're definitely like, skewed towards a justice, social action orientation. But we hosted a living room Sunday gathering, just like sometimes a church start or a church plant might start. And then very quickly, this photo you see here is one of our first events at a co-working space in Oakland that's called Oak Stop. And so, we just started taking over spaces and gathering. Bethsaida, I'm going to turn it to you for the next two. You're muted, Bethsaida.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. As Martin spoke earlier, Thrive Network exists to gather people at the intersection of meaning, belonging, and music, the arts and social change. And it's about creating spiritual community that is not bound by conventional religious tradition. The Thrive cultivates spaces for connection, reflection, and collective action. It's supporting individuals in exploring sacred, deepening relationships, and engaging in activism that contributes to more than just compassionate world. We're guided by four principles: thriving lives, love in action, shared learning and practice, and systemic change. And what does that mean? Thriving lives is about supporting each other to live with purpose, joy, and creativity. Love in action is about letting compassion, gratitude, and empathy guide each relationship that we're in. If the shared learnings is about growing together, right, through the conversation, reflection. If the also, whenever there's if the um, a wounding in the community, that repair happens, and systemic change, as Joshua mentioned. Social justice is a big component of Thrive, and so building equitable systems for people and communities, and the planet is part of those four pillars.
So we have, a couple main kind of program areas, but our first one I already mentioned, which is our Thrive Sundays, right? So we have always hosted kind of a monthly Sunday gathering, and our template is definitely, I would say, very kindred to the Sunday church model. We have a choir that sings songs like the one we opened up with by Ma Muse, right? We have a guest speaker, right? So it's kind of like having a guest TED Talk presenter, not a spiritual leader, but a guest speaker, often someone from our movement. So Kaya Winwood, who is part of Third Act, has joined us a couple times before. A lot of amazing people, just filled with wisdom and soul, and often engaged in the world in some meaningful way. Um, Here's just an example of like one of our event flyers, right? So our themes, right? You can get building together, a world of belonging. Um, and I'll share that we started out as Thrive East Bay, as I mentioned, and then the pandemic hit, and like all organizations, we went virtual. And so Thrive Network grew during our pandemic years when we started hosting online events and community building. And suddenly we became in relationship with people all across, North America and even in other parts of the world. So we still kind of bridge our work in Oakland and hosting events in Oakland, but we do a lot online as well these days. Um, One of those offerings is Rooting in the Sacred. So I'm going to turn it back to Bethsaida to share about this.
Yeah, I just want to share that we have have had lots of offerings, and one of them was the Beloved Community Journey that happened around the pandemic, and it continues in our leadership circle. And as a result of that, we continue to kind of look further to at the different programming that would serve the community. So, Rooting in the Sacred is at the Joshua and I's at the baby. We birthed this program. We're in the second year of it. There was a very successful first year, and the second year, we're into it. And Rooting in the Sacred is a journey that is into the living the heart of the sacred. And it's a year long course to help people and support them in practice, in reflection, ritual. And it's an invitation for folks to feel the sacred in our bones, and to honor the wisdom that moves through our body, through our mind, in the world. And it's a space to really deepen relationships and community with those who are like-minded, and but it's also about deepening relationships to the more than human world, and it's an invitation to step into um, a life that's guided by reverence and curiosity and the courage to create something new. Um, this year, it was virtually, and this year we're actually doing an in-person cohort. And the course architecture as you could read there, it's at the monthly teachings and practice, at the wisdom conversations, we have a host of at the with guest teachers. They're a constellation of voices who bridge the sacred and everyday heart and practice. And among them is like Bayo Komalafe, who opens us to emergent futures. Mirabai Starr, Lamarad Owens, who's always calling us into embodied liberation. Alexis Pauline Gums, Terry Tempest Williams, and the the course also just gives lots of opportunities for the participants to engage in core practices, lots of opportunities to come together in triads, affinity groups. We have our main monthly practice session is 2.5 hours. Then we have a very dense monthly at the theme packet where there's lots of course resources, videos, at the audios, and then there's social. So there's a lot of engagement for folks. I think we try not to overwhelm people. So some of the things we let folks know that they can, if they go at their own pace, so that they don't, if they kind of burn out. But it's really, Joshua and I are just coming out of our very first in-person at the retreat for the Bay Area cohort. And it was just an amazing time of folks that are really looking for this kind of engagement and this kind of commitment and this kind of devotion to a spiritual practice. So thank you.
And let me just say one final note about our audience. So, Thrive itself, we attract probably, similar people to you and folks you hang with. But we have a wide range of generations that join us, from the 20s to, some of our elders that are actually in their 80s. So it's a very intergenerational community. Thrive has worked very intentionally to be very multiracial, right? So part of the work of building beloved community is like the practices of how we bridge across difference, including race and class, and of course, many other types of difference. So that's an edge and a skill and a practice, right? That a lot of our leadership has, and we have a deep commitment to that. Um, and I think you all get it, but we're a home for spiritual activists to like nourish their souls, right? So most folks who come to our events are very active and engaged in the world and looking for a place, right, to get filled up and be in community. And lastly, rooting in the sacred, though, because it's so explicitly about the emerging future of spirituality, right? We have the same audience, but we also have faith leaders joining us. We have chaplains, along with seekers who are just beginning their journey. So it ranges widely from, kind of novices to, lifelong faith practitioners. So let me pause there.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. That was a lot of information. I have a few additional questions, and I want to let the folks who are watching know that in maybe 10 minutes, we'll start with some of your questions. So be thinking of your questions, put them in the chat if you have them. Joshua and Bethsaida, I want to sort of help us understand a little better both Thrive and as you see it, the spiritual but not religious demographic, by way of exploring similarities and differences to what our culture is more familiar with in the way of religious institutions. And so I'm wondering, I think most people who grow up in the United States have some sense or could make some educated guesses about what spirituality or the sacred means in a Christian church or in a synagogue or, what does that mean? Or do those, I mean, Bethsaida, you definitely said that rooting in the sacred is about awakening our awareness to the heart of the sacred, our connection to the heart of the sacred. But what does that term and the term spirituality mean in the context of a place like Thrive or for the spiritual but not religious demographic?
So I could start, and then Joshua, you could at the um, go after me. I think for me, um, Thrive is not rooted in a single set of doctrine or religious beliefs, right? Instead it invites spirit spiritual exploration across the different traditions and personal practices. I think that it's not prescribing a fixed theology. I feel that it places emphasis on spiritual meaning making as dynamic and evolving rather than it anchors it in institutional religious at the specific rites or authorities or dogmas. Um, and for me, like many communities, it centers at the kind of like reflection and growth and connection and mutual care, and explores questions of meaning and identity, to live well in the world. For me, that's at the foundation and core. That's different than the worship houses, or yeah, Joshua.
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat and keep it easy. I just posted some text. It kind of crammed together. But this is from our Rooting in the Sacred webpage, right? We define sacred as that which is worthy of reverence, awe, and spiritual respect, as something that holds meaning and significance in ways that inspire our deepest care, dedication, and devotion, right? So I would, there's some further text there that you can read, right? But we have a very grounded form of spirituality. It's really focused, on life in the here and now and each other as humans and our planet, right? So I would just lift that up.
Thank you. That's really helpful. What might you say that someone who came to Thrive and was familiar with Christian or Jewish or Muslim community, what might they notice was different? You mentioned, Joshua, a lot of ways that it was similar.
You want to go best side or you want me to start?
Good.
Well, we have mixed experiences. Most people I mean, there's a lot of heart, which I think ripples out from the leadership and at the center of the community. People feel the love in the room. But, if you've grown up in a traditional religious context, I have seen many a person cry tears at one of our Thrive Sunday gatherings because it's such a healing experience for them, right? To be back in a space, right, of spirituality, but without, some of the challenges, right, they faced in their youth. So, um, I think again, you're not again not to I want to be sensitive to like saying, what we're doing is better than traditional faith, or kind of indirectly maybe offering a critique, right? But when you walk into a Thrive Sunday space, right, you're going to see, if any language at all, right, it's going to be things like those four guiding principles, right? So there's just not a strong dogma or belief system coming at you, and there's an openness and there's a freedom in that openness. Like I think there's also a challenge in being so structureless too, right? Some people really need structure and they really want, like a sacred text, to kind of lay it all out for you, right? So I think it demands more work and personal initiative, to be engaging your spirituality in the space of Thrive. But there's such freedom and openness, and acceptance, that's one thing I would say. Bethsaida, you want to round me out in other ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think I shared earlier at the um, kind of the differences, but I think also like in Thrive, facilitators and the wisdom teachers guide at um the kind of, rather than governing or having a structure that's traditionally hierarchical than in typically in at the religious or clergy formal leadership structures, right? That we foster co-creation rather than this hierarchy. I think, Thrive welcomes participants regardless of their prior religious background. So the lack thereof, um, we integrate the secular and the mystical and the spiritual experience, where religion often defines membership by shared belief or participation in particular rituals. We have a diversity and and actually welcome that and invite that. Um, and I think lastly, I want to say that we invite um, kind of a lived experience. Um, so, in terms of social engagement, so Thrive weaves spiritual exploration with practices of community care and activism and relational presence, which, for me, many religions also include service, which that Joshua spoke to. But Thrive frames it as an integral to spiritual growth rather than a moral obligation of if they're a ritual requirement. I'll stop there.
Thank you. The last question I want to ask before opening it up to the others is, so third act faith is mostly made up of people who are grounded in more traditional religious um, traditions. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions or cautions for our affinity group as we try to make ourselves welcoming to people who are spiritual but not religious, or who would be the sort of Thrive type people. What should we avoid? What should we do to be welcoming?
It, I could, I have a short response to that. I think that at the traditional faith communities are, yeah, can, for me, it's about centering compassion, justice, dignity, and belonging and care for the world. I think without any specific at the agreements or doctrines at the of a particular, faith, um, because I feel like collaboration works when groups focus on the most common commitments, um, such as addressing inequity, nurturing community well-being, and I think all at the faith, at the communities and spiritual communities and the folks that are at the nons can agree to that and respecting each other. So this means creating spaces for dialogue, for listening deeply to different experiences of the sacred, and recognizing that spirituality is a unifying force for collective action. And it's, we so need that in these days. Joshua.
Yeah, I'll share a few things. One, thank you all for your work with Third Act Faith, and of course, all the work connected to that in your own lives and communities. Yeah, I think watching the language you use, I think is really important, right? I do think there is certain language that's more universal or inclusive or bridging or less triggering, and everybody has a different relationship with every word. Like you all heard some of my spiritual background, and faith is actually still a word I can really resonate with, right? Because I have like a deeper definition, right, of faith. Um, but the words, the word religion and God can be a little triggering for me, right? I'm still, kind of healing some of those wounds, and so, Bethsaida and I use the language of sacred very choicefully, right? Our orientation isn't as secular as some groups are. There's a lot of humanists and secular groups that are kind of, I would call them even anti-religious in some of their approaches. We're really in that middle space, right? So sacred seems to be one of those terms that can still speak, right, to the deeper meaning or the higher purpose, in our own lives and in life itself, and it resonates. And there are, more whatever, secular and nature loving folks who can still resonate with the word sacred, right? Along with a lot of the spiritual but not religious folks. So again, what is that language? Like, I think third act faith as a name is really powerful and short, and so I wouldn't I wouldn't actually suggest you change that name. But it is important to know that, yeah, the language of faith itself can have a very narrow connotation that in itself from the get-go is not welcoming. And right, we need to be rallying our faith communities, right, to address the climate crisis, and it's such an important need. I was gonna say one other thing. Let me see if I can still track it. Yeah, I guess a little bit about when I shared about my experience in the interfaith context, I think that's just another thing to be sensitive to. Like, how can you be welcoming to the spiritual but not religious folks and really honor them as an equal, right? Not, it's really easy to dismiss, like, oh, those spiritual but not religious folks that just are sampling at the spiritual smorgasbord and they don't really have like any deep roots and tradition. And of course, in part, that is true of many folks, right? We all know the shadow side, right, of that kind of subculture. And there are so many folks like Bethsaida and myself and many others, right, who just have a lot of depth, a lot of commitment, and are really strong allies for what you're doing. So I think you all know that, and I'm just reaffirming that, yeah.
Thank
I
you so
just wanted to
much.
add,
Oh, go
can I
ahead.
just add one more thing? I think because one of the things that doesn't get spoken to a lot about if they're welcoming, if they're folks that are not considered religious or spiritual, are the ones who have had horrible religious and spiritual experiences, right? So they have a lot of trauma around that. So for me, kind of the question of what does trauma inform if the welcoming into at the back into these at the spaces looks like. And it's not something. It's something that's being explored. I belong to a group that's exploring that right now, but it's not something that's universally spoken of.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really important point. Before we open it up, I want to share a metaphor. Joshua, you talked about the concept of the spiritual smorgasbord, which is often used as sort of a derogatory way to talk about people who are spiritual but not religious. And I struggled with that much of my adult life and feeling really sort of less than. And the another way that's described is, there's a sort of a saying that you can't get to the deep water by digging 12 shallow wells, right? And for me, it really shifted when I read something that Mirabai Starr says about that, where she said, it's not always digging 12 shallow wells, it's using 12 different tools to dig one deep well. And for me, I was just like, yes, that is what I have been doing. And it really helped me feel more equal and more legitimate in my own journey. So I thought that might be helpful. I'd love to open it up if folks have questions for Joshua and Bethsaida. And I think we're a small enough group, you could just speak, or if you want to raise your hand, I can call on you. Hi, Ace, go ahead.
I'll start us off. Thank you so much. And thank you, the two of you, for such a thoughtful presentation to us. You mentioned two things that I think can be tied together. You were talking, I think it might have been you, Joshua, about being positive force for change in what you're preparing and programming. And for us, you know, since we're a group that is thinking all the time, basically, about climate and how to bring people to that work, I'd love to hear a little bit more from either or both of you how your groupings and gatherings and your programming for gathering, where does climate and how to connect to the natural world fit in all of that?
You want to go ahead, Joshua?
Sure. What would I say? So, thus far, Thrive is not, we're not a direct action organization. So we're mostly supporting folks who are, climate leaders who's, some of them are, staff or running, climate orgs, or other types of organizations. And just for transparency, part of our hope is like, oh, if we had enough funding, right? It's like, how could we have our version of of a third act faith, right? To really be, connecting the dots more powerfully. I think what I want to share is that I mean, we tend to attract really intersectional folks, and so I think I'm assuming this is already part of the culture of third act, that environmental justice, or the connections between climate and justice and liberation, right, is really important. And so that's that's my experience, is that environmental justice, flavors of environmental justice really resonate with our audience, right? So not to say we don't have folks who just want to go out there and plant a tree, or help build a community garden, but I think there's a lot of energy and greater purpose when people sense that, like, oh, this project, right, is both helping lift people out of poverty, along with preserving life forms, and making our planet viable for future generations. We hosted a cohort about a year ago. Maybe it's been a couple of years now. It was called Rooted and Rising, and it was a group of young change makers in the East Bay. And many of them had, climate related projects, right? So I think you all know, right? A lot of the younger generations care deeply about climate, and are just taking initiative, right? So we ran a cohort really supporting those leaders, so that they could deepen in their own work.
And I just want to add that in Rooting in the Sacred, we do have a module that this speaks to the earth as sacred and spiritual ecology. And our thinking this year, that's different than last year, is that we would actually put, invite people to bring action into that at the monthly theme, which would have to do with the environment. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to put the link for Rooting in the Sacred in the chat, so it's there if folks are interested. And I want to confirm my understanding, Bethsaida, you said that there was a local cohort, but it's also open, isn't it, to people to participate virtually?
Yeah, so at there's the main at the cohort is a virtual attendance, and then we have this year a Bay Area cohort for in-person gathering. That's aside from it, so everybody gets to participate in all of it, except that if you register for the Bay Area cohort, that's a separate it commitment that you're making. So you're adding to the commitment of the year-long journey.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And just to make it an extra clear plug, registration's still open. So we have another week, and our opening orientation session happened. We already hosted one wisdom conversation, but most of the folks participate virtually. It's a smaller group that does the in-person Bay Area cohort. So if you have interest or know folks that be like, oh, this is their cup of tea, please feel free to share with them. It's a really special offering. So back to you, Martin.
And for those who are watching a recording here, let me just say that you can find it by going to www.thrivenetwork.org/sacred. So, any other questions? Jane Ellen.
Hi, thank you all so much for your work. I was a college chaplain for many years and worked with a lot of spiritual but not religious young people. I now work for Unitarians, so similar,
Okay.
population. And I know whenever we were involved with interfaith conferences, they were so interested in the secular and non-religious folks who were there. Does Thrive work with other religious communities in an interfaith context? Do you have encounters, and does having that community of other spiritual folks make you feel more at home, maybe Joshua, than you said you had at one point in your life?
That's a really great question. I would say not, not often enough. I would say we have a lot of bridgers, folks who both attend Thrive events, but also, right, attend their religious community. For sure, I would definitely want to honor that, the UU community is very close and kindred, right? To, I would say, values and the pluralism that you find in a community like Thrive. Um, but it's, yeah, we're not actively embedded in like in, there's I'm trying to think of like Faith in Action or there what is there I'm trying to think. There is an interfaith alliance around kind of immigration work in the East Bay, right? And we kind of loosely are friends with them, and sometimes some of our song leaders go out, and support things. But it hasn't happened yet. We haven't been invited to be part of an interfaith, kind of council or community. I think it's something we'd be open to. And so just envisioning into that, I do think I would feel different, at this stage in my life and with my connection with Thrive than in my younger years when I attended an interfaith space with, no community, no connection.
And actually, at the this time around in Rooting in the Sacred, we have folks that participate in like science of the mind at the communities, right? So there's a couple of at the communities, and we have somebody in our at the leadership circle who's the head pastor of the Center for Spiritual Living, and so at the there we have kind of informal relationships, I would say.
Well, it sounds like even within Thrive, you have some different communities represented, so
Yeah,
almost an interfaith dynamic there. Yeah, very,
yeah,
thank
yeah,
That's true. Yeah.
yeah. Christy.
Yeah, Christy, and I think this will need to be our last question, but please go ahead.
Well, this is actually piggybacking on what Martin had offered about the 12 different tools. And I'm just curious about the practices and the rituals that you say that people discover both collectively and individually, and the source for those. Are those other religious traditions? Are they
That's a great question. Yeah.
guided imagery? I mean, I'm just curious about the practicality of how people claim their individual journey.
So, Bethsaida, I'll go first, so then
Yeah.
you can round me out. So, we we have a process where I'll just speak where we both support and invite people to both reclaim practices and parts of their, be it their family, traditions from their family upbringing or from their ancestral traditions, right? We have a lot of folks who are reconnecting with their ancestral lines. And part of that sometimes means discovering, right, spiritual sources of wisdom and right practices from that. And then there's the exploration of different practices from other sources of wisdom and traditions. And again, we really have conversations about what is called spiritual cultural appropriation versus
Right,
spiritual cultural
right.
adaptation. And so I think there's a lot of emerging wisdom around how to do that in a good way. And people like Mirabai Starr, she's a great gift and has one perspective. And then there's a lot of innovating, right? And so by innovating, um, it's not completely in a vacuum because everything is connected and like, so there's some wisdom or examples from other places, but we create rituals that are, literally it's a leader, somebody on our team, right? Just like has the inspiration and has experienced, other rituals, and they design kind of a more universal ritual, right? That yeah, again, isn't rooted in a particular tradition or, language. And so Bethsaida and I create guided meditation practices, right? And rituals, again, just based on our own experience with other communities. So I guess I'm just trying to share. It really is a mix of all of those things. And in rooting in the sacred, we have a guided process where people really, slowly go on that journey of learning and reflecting and then discerning and then experimenting, right? And then starting to embody. And it really is a living, process that they're going on. I think there's still, I'm someone who really, I'm attracted to the language of spiritual formation and what, the spiritual guiding, and coaching, right, around spiritual lives. And so, I do think there are some great people out there with developmental maps and understandings of how humans, develop and evolve spiritually, right? And so, I guess what I'm saying is, I think there's further possibilities for our work, right, to get even clearer and helping guide and support people, and crafting, a very whole and dynamic, spiritual life. Bethsaida.
And the only thing I want to add is that we, that just like you guys invited me to do an opening, we actually invite the participants to do openings and closings, and they bring in their own kind of the spiritual backgrounds into the fold, right? So, whether it be indigenous or, science of the mind or the Yoruba or Santeria, we invite the folks to bring in their different rituals and spiritual traditions into the fold.
Well, Joshua and Bethsaida, thank you so much for this time. It's really generous of you to give us this time and your wisdom. And I think it's actually going to be really useful as Third Act Faith tries to open our arms and doors to the spiritual but not religious and the spiritual activists who don't come from a conventional faith tradition. So thank you so much. And Ace, I think you are taking us up next.
I am. Joshua and Bethsaida, you do not have to stay and listen, but you're more than welcome. What I wanted to do right now, and it might be of interest to the two of you, is give our members a chance to actually look at our website with me. I'm going to share it, so let me see if I can do that. That's the first thing. Let's see. Here we go. Do you all see that? Yes? Okay, great. So we're in third act. And why do we need to know about our website? Because, well, for one thing, this is a personal quest of my own because I love what we do in third act faith. I love our contemplative nature. I love our guests, including tonight, that help us think more spiritually and more openly. But I also have this constant kind of push to want to do a little bit more action on behalf of our world and the earth. And so I wanted to know more about what activities Third Act offers those of us in Third Act faith. And so I kind of looked around and I found this website, and honest to God, I've been working in Third Act Faith for about 2 years. I'd never been to this website before. So you might be like me, or you might be a lot quicker than I am on the draw. But I just wanted to show you a few things here. So first off, Kathleen, who is our wonderful facilitator, in case people don't know her, wave Kathleen wherever you are. Hopefully Kathleen will put the email into the chat how to get to this third act. She did that for me, and I'm sure it's quite simple, but hopefully it's there. So this is the homepage. And what I wanted to show you, not forever, just kind of quickly, is some of the features of this webpage that might be of use to you all. So first off, here they have these features. And of course, what caught my mind is, melt the companies that profit from ICE and DHS. And if you open this, which I'm not going to do now, you'll get a whole list, but you'll also get a lot of instructions about who to write letters to, how to track this. It's a very I kind of been looking for something like that myself, how to respond to what's happening with ICE. Here it is on our homepage in third act. And then, of course, reminding everyone of this National Day of Kings, of Action for No Kings, March 28th. That's great. So there's a couple of things here that you could do just by opening up the homepage and learn about. And then they give you really helpful ways to get involved, which I also appreciate. How to find a working group. We are an affinity group. We'll talk about that in a minute, but you can find a local group too, or at least a regional group from wherever. I noticed a lot of you are from California on the call tonight. There was someone from San Diego, somebody from Berkeley. I got my PhD in Berkeley, whoever that was. So that's great, but there are people from all over the country that can find your own home-based group. If you're lucky, they're not everywhere. So that's another thing. Attend an event, you get it. You can do a lot of this on your own. Taking an action lets you know some of the things you might want to do today, tomorrow, the next day. Some of the upcoming third act central events. The one I really hope enjoy, an all-in call that's coming up on pretty soon, March 30th. This one, Simplify Solar. This is one of the events that I hope to get Third Act Faith a little bit more up to date on, trying to bring solar into your homes and into your communities, into your schools, your churches. I hate to embarrass you, Ishrari, if I pronounced or didn't pronounce your name correctly, I know is a big solar person where she comes from. I'm glad to see you here tonight. So this is something that you can do in your local communities, and Third Act will help you with what you need to do. The interesting thing is where all these groups are, these working groups. So if I open it even farther, we have all over the country, you're going to see, and there's lots in California and Oregon over here, a bunch on the East Coast, down south a little bit. So you might dig around and find a group where you are to get involved in local and more regional events. I'm not telling you don't keep coming to Third Act Faith. I want you in Third Act Faith. I want you with us as we build our resources to act on behalf of democracy and the climate, but also you can do a little bit more locally too if you're interested in more activity. I promised Jane Ellen, and I was going to do it anyways. Third Act Faith. So we have our perfect, I'm very impressed with what Jane Ellen and a few others have done with our particular home site. So for instance, the thing that would be most important, all of this is wonderful. Right now, I can show you that Jim Antal, who's a member of our steering committee, just wrote a very beautiful essay that Jane Ellen just put up in our newsletter. This isn't the newsletter. This is Going Deep, right? It's an essay. I'll ask you to talk about that a little bit more, just so people know how to get that versus the website itself. But if we go back up just for a minute, if you go to events, and this is where I'll end, guess what? You see all the wonderful things that you have coming up in the next month. There is tonight, we did it. We can check it off. There's a coffee clutch where some of you might have been. I've met some of you through that. No agenda at the coffee clutch except drink something if you want and just chat about whatever comes up for all of us. I've now been at two of them, and I've really enjoyed meeting people in a little bit more informal. The work that reconnects, that Martin really is involved in helping run and facilitate. That's been a big success for Third Act Faith. And then the thing I really want to show you is the general meeting next time, April 21st, with Bishop Marian Edgar Buddy, it was rescheduled from earlier in the year, and I have heard her speak. She's quite something, and she will have a lot of sage wisdom, I think, about where we're at in our democracy and where we should be going in our climate work. So make sure to put that in your calendar. So before I get off all this, I'm going to go back to our home and ask Jane Ellen if you just speak quickly to us about how can people, if they're not already, either how to get subscribe to the newsletter, or maybe everybody already is, and if they are, also get this.
Yes, we are actually in the transition of how we do our newsletter. If you joined Third Act Faith anytime in the last 3-4 years, you should be getting our news and views. We send it out through Substack, and then an essay like this one would also go out. It's a separate Substack for longer essays that we call Going Deep. We are in the process of transitioning, so our news and views will come out of a program called Action Network. So again, if you have signed up for Third Act Faith, you will be getting that directly from in an email. We'll also be sending a notification every time we do a Going Deep essay, so that people will get that too. I know that sounds confusing. We're trying to spell it out in each issue so you know how to keep getting what we're sending out. But if you have joined Third Act Faith, which I'm assuming most of you have since you knew about this meeting, in the future, if you've attended one of our meetings, you will be added to our list, and so you'll automatically hear about upcoming meetings. So shouldn't need to go sign up for anything. But if you're not getting anything, let us know and we'll make sure you're on the list.
Thank you. And with that, if there's any questions about what I just showed you, you all can do it at the fingertip yourself, just like I did. Okay, I think I'll turn it back to Kathleen. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Y'all just put it all out there. I have put all the links into the chat. And folks who are listening to this recording later, just go to thirdact.org/faith and you'll see all of the things we talked about just now. I think we have Ashwari. Oh, were you just waving?
No, I wanted to just say to Martin and to all of you at Third Act Faith, I am a spiritual, not religious person, and I have felt extremely welcomed by this group. And
Good.
I don't feel any less than in any way. So it's working, at least for me. I feel that
That's
it's a
good to know.
beautiful, it's a spiritual and activist home for me, one of, several, but one of the ones I really try to get attend. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Ishwari. Yeah, I'm with you. I identify as Christian, but as Joshua and Bethsaida were talking, I could hear myself in a lot of their words. I think I actually draw from a number of different practices, if you will. So yeah, it was great hearing it from that perspective and feeling validated in that way. We have one last song that I hope you all stick around for. It's just 3 minutes long. I think we're good otherwise. So Jane Ellen, it is you. Oh, thanks all for coming.
God is change, God is the wind. I learn over and over again. Tender rain and thunderstorms cleanse my soul till I'm reborn. Let my path and guide my hand, so I may hear the song of the land, offering up my heart in prayer, spirit moving everywhere. Love sing through me, still my mind and move my body. Love sing through me,
All right.
Great choice
All
of
right.
music, Bethsaida. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.